You wouldn't believe me if I told you my most dangerous exchange happened inside a state library. No passwords, no briefcases, just books. Dusty, silent, supposedly forgotten books. It started with a note scribbled in the margin of the brothers. Karamazov, a word I recognized. A number I wasn't supposed to see. I assumed it was coincidence. It wasn't. Back then, Berlin was already split in half concrete outside, paper walls inside. I was just an analyst. Cultural liaison, they called. It's Sundays off the record. And she never even looked at me. But somehow we read each other, page by page, shelf by shelf, until I realized I wasn't the one doing the reading anymore. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And tell me what city you're watching from, and what time it is. I like knowing where in the world people still dare to listen to secrets like these. Berlin, May 1970. The Western Library's heat never worked, but the silence always did. The first time I saw her, she didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't glance up, just stamped the inside cover of Faust and slid it across the counter like it weighed more than it did. Sundays were always quiet, but that day, the stillness felt different. Not tense, not empty, just attentive. My cover was solid. Cultural analyst from Washington, fond of German literature, predictable borrowing habits. No one watched me twice, especially not in the old state library near Tiergarten, where the heating was more myth than amenity. The Stasi had eyes elsewhere. Or so we thought. By then, I'd spent 5 years in West Berlin. My real job? Monitoring Soviet ideological shifts through cultural output: films, plays, essays, novels. What people celebrated, what they censored. The agency loved patterns, and I was good at finding them. Too good, sometimes. The habit started by accident. A book. Misfiled. Thomas Mann in the Russian section. Inside, a passage underlined twice. At the margin, a penciled number. 471. I flipped to page 471 in the same volume. Found nothing. But it bothered me. So I returned it the next Sunday, watched her shelve it back without a word. A week later, I borrowed the trial. Same hand. Different number. 19. This time, on page 19, a phrase circled in faint pencil. He knew it wasn't a court. I logged it, filed it, mentioned it briefly in a side report about Eastern Bloc dissent expressed through literature. Langley. Ignored it, but I didn't. By month's end, I had 6 books with similar marks, all pulled from different sections, all returned to her, all passed through hands that smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. No other librarian worked Sundays. No one else left those marks. It wasn't just subtext anymore. It was structure. I tested it, checked out a lesser-known Heinrich Ball novel. The next Sunday, when I opened it in the archive reading room, the mark was already waiting. A date, 3 days later. A real one. The night of that date, a courier from our side was intercepted near Checkpoint Charlie. His map was compromised. We traced the breach to a leak from Soviet cultural contacts. It matched. The same book, the same date. A warning right in the open. From that point forward, I stopped calling it coincidence. We weren't just reading. We were corresponding. No words, no glances. No risk of surveillance catching anything except 2. People silently interacting with government-issued property. I called it the Protocol of Silence. She never knew I'd named it. Or maybe she did. Somehow, the system kept evolving. The codes became clearer. Baits, coordinates, even oblique. References to asset movements. At first, I thought I was the one decoding her. But looking back now, I wonder if she wasn't decoding me. That should have been the end of it. But then I found a book I'd never checked out. with a note addressed to me. It was the Magic Mountain, not a favorite of mine. Too long-winded, too metaphorical. But there it was, in my locker, not the reading room. No checkout slip. No note from staff. Just the book and a folded library request card tucked between pages 122 and 123. Someone had written in German. Slanted handwriting, neat but quick. Repeat patterns speak louder than spoken plans. Underneath, a number, 11.0370. I didn't report it, didn't log it either. I just showed up that Sunday, found the same librarian in her usual position behind the oak counter. As always, she didn't acknowledge me. But when I placed the Magic Mountain on the return shelf, her hand paused just a second longer than usual. From then on, the exchanges became deliberate. Books with certain authors carried messages. She used double underlines for locations, dog-eared, corners for frequency, and pencil dots tiny, almost imperceptible on title pages to indicate urgency. We were building a language, and every letter of it was silent. I tested her again. Checked out Steppenwolf, returned it with a small fold. On page 9, next Sunday, she handed me Brave New World. Inside, page 9 had a phrase underlined. We are all conditioned. That was the first time I smiled in that building. No one saw. It became ritual. Every Sunday, I'd sit in the archive room, pretending to study. She'd rotate carts past the desk, shelving or collecting. No interaction, just proximity. Once in a while, a paperclip would be tucked into a back sleeve, or a small X marked lightly in pencil beside the call number on a due slip. Never the same symbol twice, but always meaningful. She never broke the rhythm. Never slipped. One time, I brought a book from my own apartment, Slaughterhouse 5, and left it on the donations cart with a highlighted section. She returned it the next week with the same page torn out. In its place, a clipping from Berliner Zeitung reporting a border arrest near Potsdamer Platz. After that, I stopped trying to surprise her. She was 2 steps ahead. And yet, for all the coded fluency we developed, we never spoke. Not once, not even a nod. My handler at the consulate began to take notice. Asked if I was getting too comfortable in my reading chair. I said nothing useful. They didn't press yet. The more we talked through books, the more I became convinced this wasn't improvisation. It was design. The codes weren't improvised. They had grammar. And whoever created them had done this before, which meant she wasn't a sympathizer. She was a professional. I should have stopped then. Reported everything. Let Langley parse it, but I didn't. I kept reading, kept folding pages and underlining answers, kept showing up on Sundays. She gave me We by Zamyatin. On the inside cover, one line in French, CQ nous cachons dit plus que CQ nous montrons. What we hide says more than what we show. That book never went back on the shelf. I kept it. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the first trap. Not the messages, not the technique, just the comfort of being read, even silently. We were building something without speaking, but every new page brought a new possibility. That maybe I wasn't the reader anymore. Maybe I was the story. It started to feel less like tradecraft and more like chess. Each book she offered wasn't just literature, it was a move. And I responded, sometimes without knowing what game we were playing. One Sunday, she placed Dr. Zhivago at the end of the returns cart. Page 134 had a word underlined twice, crossing. Page 221, window. Page 342, silent. I matched those positions to a map of our current intel routes across the Friedrichstraße sector. There was a window on the 3rd floor of an abandoned apartment across from a tram line. We used it once, in winter. Never again. Too exposed. That week, A civilian agent got nabbed near their snatched just before reaching the window. His contact never showed. She wasn't giving me warnings anymore. She was giving updates. And I couldn't tell if she was protecting our assets or watching them fall. One Tuesday, I checked the schedule. She wasn't even supposed to work Sundays. But there she was. Always there. Always quiet. I asked for her personnel file through a back channel. Came back empty. No name. No employment history. Technically, no record of her working for the library at all. And yet, she stamped the books, filed the slips, processed returns with the exactitude of someone trained to leave no fingerprints except the ones she meant to leave. Then came the possessed, which wasn't even part of the regular collection. Inside, 3 words underlined in red: mirror. Photograph, stairs. I checked the archival staircase the next Sunday. A mirror had been moved slightly on the landing. Behind it, pinned to the concrete, was a strip of film, already fogged. No useful intel. But the intent was clear. She could leave anything, anywhere. And I would follow at this point. I had to ask myself the question we're trained to ask. Every operative after prolonged indirect contact. Who is leading the exchange? And worse, what aren't you seeing? Still, I didn't pull out. Didn't report. Didn't question the system, just adapted to it. I justified it as efficacy. The data was real, timely, actionable. But the method? That was hers. One Sunday, I left her the spy who came in from the cold. No marks. Just the book. A test. The next week, she gave it back with a single edition. A piece of gauze, folded inside the front cover, smelling faintly of rubbing alcohol. A medic's calling. Card. Someone had been patched up. Someone close. That week, my courier changed handlers. And the new one? She had a limp and carried a Russian medical kit. I didn't ask. Didn't need to. By now. I was addicted to the interaction, to the elegance of it. No drops. No whispers. Just lines and creases, placed precisely enough to make or break missions. That week, I filed my first sanitized summary of the book code system, but I left her out of it. Referred to her only as source apparatus, because a part of me still thought, still hoped, that maybe she was working for us. That we were partners. Silent, brilliant, bound by a mutual understanding of the written word. That was the last time. I believe that. By summer, the Sundays stopped feeling like surveillance. They felt intimate, not in any sentimental way, just precise, familiar, predictable in a city where nothing else was. The archive room was cold, as always. She'd leave a chair slightly pulled back. Books stacked vertically instead of horizontally, our quiet signal for read this first. I never touched them before she walked away. That was part of the ritual. I'd sit for 2 hours, always 2. Same coat, same thermos. The only variable was what she left. And one Sunday, the book was The Master and Margarita. Page 143 held, lines circled in pencil. The shadows were drawn not by the moon, but by something far darker. It wasn't intel, not directly. It was a warning in tone, a shift. Something had changed. The books that followed became harder to decode, less overt, more metaphorical. I found myself second-guessing every underline, every fold. Was red still a reference to Soviets? Was closed window still a no-go zone? Or was I just chasing ghosts in the margins? Then came the Russian novel. I don't remember the title, just the quote she marked. La traición es un juego que nadie gana. Betrayal is a game no one wins. She tucked it into a stack like any other. But this time, she placed it on the table, not the cart. Her fingers brushed the corner as she let go. For the first time, I saw her look at me, not fully, just a flicker of the eyes. And then it was gone. I kept the book an extra week. Reread. The phrase 4 times. No coordinates. No names. Just the concept. I started wondering who she'd lost. What betrayal meant to her. Whether the quote was a warning or a confession. The next Sunday, she wasn't there. A replacement manned the desk. Said she was on reassignment. Didn't know details. That was the first time I felt something. Close to worry. Not about the operation. About her dot she returned the week after. No explanation. Just the same silence, the same rhythm. But the next book she gave me had no markings. Just a pressed violet between pages 17 and 18. I didn't know what it meant. Still don't. We kept going, but the tone had shifted. The pace changed. Like the last act of a play none of us wrote, but we both recognized. One Sunday, I left her nothing. No book. Just showed up and sat in the chair. She walked by with a volume of Dostoevsky, dropped it beside me. Inside, one phrase circled 3 times. You see what you want. Until it's too late. The next morning, I found out one of our Berlin field contacts had vanished. No warning, no message. Just gone. That's when I realized this wasn't sustainable. There were no backups, no verifications. Only 2 people, reading each other's silence, in a room full of books and nobody else listening. Still, I kept going, because something about the routine felt safer than admitting we had no control. Safer than asking, what if she wasn't alone? He showed up, unannounced. Wore civilian clothes, but the posture gave him away. Langley sent him, or someone who said Langley sent him. No name. Just a badge number and a smile too casual to be local. He waited until I left the library. Intercepted me 2 blocks away near the tram stop. Asked if I wanted coffee. I said nothing. He paid anyway. The cafe was quiet. German jazz playing softly. 2 tables occupied. He opened with the usual small talk weather. Embassy staffing. A memo about budget cuts. Then he leaned in. Something's not adding up, he said. Some of your page references don't match. I played dumb. He didn't blink. You're either being fed corrupted intel, he said, or someone's editing your output downstream. I asked if that was an accusation. He shrugged. Just a pattern. That was enough to make me sweat. Because I'd seen the same thing. Cross-checking my reports, I found annotations I didn't remember including. Changes too subtle for rookies. Too precise to be arbitrary. One brief mentioned a name I'd never used. Another alluded to a location we hadn't cleared, but all filed under my clearance. My signature dot back at the consulate. I pulled hard copies. From storage. Same discrepancies. Whoever was altering them wasn't doing it sloppily. They were replicating my language. Better than I could. I considered confronting her, asking directly, breaking the silence. But that would break everything. There were no channels for this kind of accusation. Only consequences. Instead, I started, logging everything privately. Each book, each note, each page number. I photographed the margins before returning anything. Filed it off-grid. She seemed to notice. One Sunday, the book she handed me had no codes, no folds, no underlines, just a blank note tucked inside with the phrase, "You're being watched by someone who reads better than you." I looked up. She was already gone. The week after, my handler reassigned my courier. No explanation. They also added a second analyst to cross-review my summaries. They called it standard protocol. It wasn't. They stopped asking me to interpret her codes, stopped trusting what I decoded, which meant either they suspected me, or they suspected her, or both. I considered stepping away, pulling out, clean, but I was already in too deep. Too many pages, too many secrets layered in pencil and silence. One night, I tried to recreate an entire book's set of marks from memory. Failed twice, and that's when I realized I wasn't following her messages. I was following what I thought she meant, which is exactly how you manipulate someone. They didn't say it directly, but I was under review. My reports were going nowhere. No response from Langley. No directives. I wasn't being corrected. I was being observed. And I still showed up that Sunday. Sat in the same chair. Read a book she hadn't touched. I needed to see if the silence changed. When no one wrote back, it DIDN single quotes T. It was crime and punishment. Ironically fitting. I didn't request it, didn't expect it, but it was waiting on the return shelf. Spine. Clean, no markings. Until I opened it. Inside, on page 78, a corner folded inwards, then outwards. A kind of double dog ear. The mark led me to a passage about guilt being a weight that shifts sides depending on who's holding it. I almost laughed. Then I found the insert. Thin paper, cheap stock, folded 3 times. On it, 4 initials, a time, and what looked like a license plate. No context. Just urgency. I didn't recognize the initials. Didn't question the source. I just passed the information to my interim courier. 3 days later, 2 of our agents walked into a warehouse outside Wedding District. Only one walked out. He bled out in the car. The other one never made it to his safe house. The intel was faulty. The timing was off. And worse, someone had clearly known they were coming. It came back to me. My name. My code. My report. I tried to explain. Tried to prove the markings weren't mine, that the note was planted. But the message had my handwriting, or something indistinguishable from it. They didn't accuse me. They just stopped looking me in the eye. I got a sealed envelope the following week. 4 pages. A formal inquiry about the irregular intelligence stream attached to my desk. Each question more surgical than the last. Had I verified the source of annotations? Had I cross-validated dates? Had I ever spoken to any librarian outside protocol? The last one chilled me. Have you, at any point, accepted unlogged written material through unofficial channels? I didn't answer. Not fully. Not because I was hiding something, but because I couldn't tell anymore what counted as unofficial. I knew I couldn't protect her, but I also knew I couldn't explain her. So I reconstructed the interaction from memory, just enough to show pattern, but not identity. Enough to justify myself without pointing fingers. The review went nowhere, no official reprimand, but I was pulled from the decryption loop, given quieter tasks. Bureaucracy. I still showed up that Sunday. She was there. We exchanged nothing. That week, she shelved the fall. Inside, page 187 was torn halfway and folded into a triangle. I didn't open it. Didn't want to read what I already feared. Someone was watching us both now. And the code? The code had been compromised. By who? I still wasn't sure. But the books weren't just carrying messages anymore. They were carrying consequences. There's a room in every consulate where old reports go to die. Filing cabinets, misaligned labels, documents yellowed at the corners from coffee and shame. That's where I went. Not for nostalgia, just for confirmation. I'd requested access under pretense of clarifying a date in a 1968 cultural shift brief. Nobody asked questions. Nobody cared. I found it in drawer 17B, my report on the Zamyatin file. But it wasn't mine. Same layout, same codes, same tone. Except the conclusion had changed, or I had written, source may be external, possibly local asset. This version said, internal contact, confirmed asset conduit. And it bore my name, my clearance, my stamp, except I never wrote that. Sentence. I flipped back through older summaries. Same pattern, same format, but adjusted just enough to nudge interpretation. Not enough to raise suspicion, unless you remembered every word. I did. Some of them were handwritten. Mine always went through the typewriter. That's when the realization hit. I wasn't just being watched. I was being rewritten. They were using my books, my habits, my tone. The infiltration wasn't outside it, was inside my own reports. Every page I trusted had a ghost version, and that meant one thing. Someone had access to both the books. And the aftermath, she had never just been passing information. She'd been shaping the interpretation, feeding the data, then rewriting the way I explained it. At that point, it didn't matter if she was KGB, Stasi, or a ghostwriter from hell. She'd used me, built credibility through me, created a feedback loop in which I legitimized her fiction. That Sunday, I arrived early, tried to see where she entered from. No sign. She appeared an hour later, same coat, same routine. Like nothing had changed. I asked the desk clerk for her name. He looked at me like I was mad. Said the Sunday shift was always self-service. I checked the records. No entry log. No staff roster. That day, I borrowed the man without qualities. Inside, one page had no text. Just a note glued onto the paper with surgical tape. You were never supposed to check the original files. I tore the note, burned it at home. She knew. Knew I'd start digging. Knew I'd notice, which meant the loop had closed. I was no longer the reader. I wasn't even the messenger. I was the story. She always left 5 minutes before closing. Same side door, same rhythm. That Sunday, I followed her. Kept distance too. Tram stops, a shortcut through the courtyard behind the Natural History Museum. She didn't look back, didn't speed up, didn't slow down. Like she knew I'd be there. She walked to Friedrichstraße, not the tourist part, the side that smelled like metal and steam. Past the bakery that never opened, through the alley where we once picked up a drop from a Czech journalist in single quotes 68. She turned the corner near the kiosk, then vanished. I waited. 7 minutes later, she reappeared. No bag, no books, just a small envelope, light brown, tucked under her coat. She handed it to a man leaning against the wall, smoking with the same posture every KGB liaison seemed to learn in training. Casual, crooked, cruel. They didn't talk, didn't shake hands. She just passed it and kept walking. He stayed, lit another cigarette, waited, then left in the opposite direction. I didn't follow him. Didn't need to. That moment confirmed everything. She hadn't been inserting herself into our system. She had built it, engineered the communication flow, chosen which signals to send and which ones to blur. And I had provided the narrative, legitimized every mark she made, framed it all in language Langley trusted. Because I trusted her, the betrayal wasn't personal. It was structural, flawless. That night, I tried to retrace the entire operation, from the first underline to the last torn page, but none of it was mine anymore. She'd erased authorship. The next Sunday, I didn't go to the library, didn't leave my flat, just stared at the single piece of evidence I'd kept, the violet flower between pages 17 and 18, pressed dry, still intact, still senseless. I started to wonder, had I ever influenced anything? Or had every decision I made already been anticipated? She knew how we processed intelligence. She knew how we phrased memos, how we filed names. She didn't intercept, use. She became us. Every story we believed about her, we wrote ourselves. She just gave us the punctuation. That was the moment I stopped being angry and started being afraid. The book was Notes from Underground, fitting title. It was one of the earliest she'd ever marked, one of our first conversations. I hadn't touched it in months, but it was back on the shelf. Waiting, I hesitated. Checked the checkout ledger. No record of it being returned. No signature. I took it anyway. In my flat. I opened to the page I remembered. 213. That was where she'd once underlined a passage about anonymity being the only true power. But now the page was gone. Ripped out, clean. In its place, a note. Typed, not handwritten. No signature. Now you know how the story ends. Nothing else. No code. No metaphor. Just finality. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled every book we'd ever exchanged. Reread each mark. Tried to reconstruct what had been real and what had been written for me. The trail was dead. No new symbols. No traces. And yet, someone filed a request under my name to retrieve all those volumes. Someone sent them for preservation. Someone made sure they were sealed under internal intelligence training materials. Someone wrote me into a story I never agreed to be part of. I tried to delete what I could. Burned my personal notes. Wiped copies. Filed a report saying the source had gone dark. It was no longer viable. No one responded. The library shifted schedules. My clearance downgraded. The office calls stopped, and I still had no idea where she went, or if she'd ever existed in the records to begin with. But I knew this. My name was on a dozen internal briefs with intel I never sourced. I'd been made into a ghostwriter for an operation I never ran. And my story was no longer mine. They didn't fire me. They didn't need to. One by one, my privileges vanished. First, access to cultural briefings. Then, review roles. Then, the internal memos stopped arriving altogether. Got no formal accusation, no hearing. Just a quiet, bureaucratic burial. My name remained on the roster. My office stayed the same. But the phone stopped ringing. And the books stopped being delivered. One morning, I logged into the record system. My credentials still worked. But when I searched for my own reports, a red flag appeared. Quarantine protocol. Do not circulate without supervisory clearance. Even my hidden drafts were marked for internal review. Someone had tagged them as contaminated inputs. No explanation. Just a code string I didn't recognize. I requested clarification. Twice. The responses never came. Eventually, I asked for a meeting with Langley. Formal letter, sealed, routed through diplomatic pouch. I received confirmation it had arrived. That was 2 months before I stopped trying. In the meantime, they reassigned my replacement. Younger, fluent in 3 dialects. Trusted, he didn't ask me a single question about transition. That's when I understood. They weren't waiting to prosecute me. They were waiting for me to disappear. Quietly, I could have raised hell, filed appeals, demanded a tribunal. But for what? There was no evidence, only patterns. And in our world, patterns kill faster than bullets. I tried to warn one of my old handlers. Left him a note in a book we used to pass between offices. 2 days later, I found the book returned to my desk with the spine sliced open. Empty. Message received. So I stopped. Stopped decoding. Stopped digging. Stopped pretending I had control over any of it. But I never stopped remembering. That's the thing no one warns you about. You can erase files. You can burn reports. But the silence? The part where no one tells you what really happened. That part stays. And eventually, you start talking to yourself just to make sure you still exist. This story, this confession, isn't about redemption. It's just proof that I was there. I hadn't been back in months. But something pulled. Not nostalgia habit, maybe. Muscle memory masquerading as intent. It was a gray Sunday. Berlin always is. in the in-between seasons. I walked past the same cracked sidewalk, the same broken clock outside the gate. Inside, the air smelled the same dust, varnish, something vaguely burnt. She wasn't there. Of course, she wasn't. A younger librarian stood behind the desk, polite, distracted. Didn't recognize me. Didn't need to. I asked, casually, about the Sunday librarian from the archives. She frowned. Which one? I didn't answer. Just walked to the Russian section. Third row, left side, 5 shelves down. There it was. A new book. Hardcover, no jacket. Red spine. L'Arte de Finger. I'd never seen it before. Wasn't in the catalog. No barcode. No stamps. I opened it. Nothing. No underlines. No folded pages. No clipped notes. Just blank, crisp print. I flipped to the end. No dedications. No acknowledgments. No sign of her. Just the title again. On the final page. Center aligned. ITALICIZ D.L'Arte de Finger. I held it for a long time. Didn't sit. Didn't blink. Didn't check it out. I returned it to the shelf. Exactly as I found it. Somehow, that was the most personal message she ever sent. I left the building without looking back. But as I crossed the courtyard, I glanced up 3rd floor, eastern window. The curtain shifted. Or maybe I imagined it. Hard to say anymore. But that was the last Sunday I ever entered that library. And the only one that felt unfinished. There's no file for this. No case number. No code name. Just me. And the version of me that survived. I live far from Berlin now. Quiet town. Bland food. Nice weather. Nobody asks questions. Sometimes I take the train into the city just to feel anonymous again. I read in public. Nobody watches. Nobody flips the corners of their pages like she did. And still, every now and then, I catch a phrase in a book that feels familiar, like a whisper left years ago, just loud enough for memory. But the truth is, I'll never know what was real. Not fully. She might have been KGB, might have been something worse. A fabricator, a manipulator, or maybe just a better spy than I ever was. What I do know is this. Somewhere, there are pages that carry my name, my style, my rhythm, my seal, but not my truth. Pages that were never mine, and yet will always be traced back to me. I was read, rewritten, and shelved, waiting for someone else to decode a story I never meant to tell. Sierra Final. 150 palabras. I don't dream of her. I don't miss the codes, the silence, or the weight of unread pages. What I do miss is the certainty that what I saw, what I filed, what I lived meant something. Now, I'm not so sure. Some nights I still check the spine of old books for pencil marks. Habit dies slower than fear. Truth even slower. The chair I sit in creaks like the one in the archive room. I keep thinking the next page will bring closure. It never does. Last week, I found a second-hand copy of The Trial at a flea market. Page 213 was torn. I didn't ask why. Didn't need to. I just walked away. Because I already know. Some endings are written by those who never intended to stop reading. If you made it this far, maybe you were meant to hear this. Subscribe if you want to know what else never made it to the files. And tell me in the comments, did you already know about any of this? Or did I just ruin your sleep?